Hello, my name is Brant, and today I am going to talk about Allodial Title. Most people in this country are completely misguided and think that they own their own property, and that is not so. If it was, if you owned it, why do you pay property tax? Is one argument. Okay. So I'm going to read a definition of allodial title. Allodial title constitutes ownership of real property that is independent of any superior landlord. Allodial title is related to the concept of land held in allodium, or land ownership by occupancy and defense of the land. Historically, much of the land was uninhabited and could therefore be held in allodial. Most property ownership in common law jurisdiction is fee simple. In the United States, repeat, the land is subject to eminent domain by the federal, state, and local government, and subject to the imposition of taxes by state and or local governments, and there is thus no true allodial land. Some states within the U.S. have provisions for considering land allodial under state law, and the terms may be used in other circumstances. For example, land is held of the Crown in England and Wales and other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth realms. So, how did this be? How did this happen? Well, some major things took place in 1213. And actually, I'm going to go back further, back to 1066. And I'm quoting from a gentleman named the Informer, and he quotes this as simply the beginning of the lie. Once upon a time, before the year 1066, the people of England held allodial title to their land. Not even the king could take the land for not paying a tithe. William the Conqueror came in 1066 and stole the king's title and took the land of the people. So there's where it began. From William I, 1066 to the King John of 1199, England was in dire straits, and it was in fact bankrupt. Well, when you get bankrupt, it's when you quote-unquote fight stupid wars. And I know that England and France fought many wars, so it kind of basically, you basically put yourself in a hard spot. So the king invoked the law of mortmain, the dead man's hand. So people couldn't pass their land on to the church or anyone else without the king's permission. Wow, isn't that interesting? It would be considered today modern day probate. Wow. So you see how this has been passed. Lawyers are the most disgusting people besides priests. They lie and they lie and they lie for what I call a group of people who create words out of nothing called the bar. And they see themselves as superior to you. And at one time, the 13th Amendment here in the United States dealt with people like lawyers, because it dealt with people who had titles, and it forbid them to, quote unquote, to not hold office. If they did, they would forfeit their right as a citizen of this country. Most people don't know that. The 13th Amendment is key. And the sad part is that England came here to deal with that. They knew that the power that was enacted by the states, because it was ratified. And it was ratified, and so they came here for one reason, to burn almost all the buildings in Washington, D.C., to eliminate the paperwork that basically passed the amendment. But a gentleman and a friend of his actually did some historical look back. The gentleman was David M. Dodge, is who it was. And in 1983, he and former Baltimore police investigator Tom Dunn was searching for evidence of government corruption in public records stored in the Belfast Library on the coast of Maine. By chance, they discovered the library's oldest authentic copy of the Constitution of the United States, printed in 1825. Both men were stunned to see this document, including a 13th Amendment that no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. You heard that right. You've been lied to so many times you don't know what is real and what's not. Moreover, after studying the amendment's language and historical context, they realized the principal intent of this meaning. The 13th Amendment was to prohibit lawyers from serving in government. So it began a 7-year nationwide search for the truth surrounding the most bizarre constitutional puzzle in American history: the unlawful removal of a ratified amendment from the Constitution of the United States. It's never been unratified, folks. They just covered it up. Since 1983, Dodge and Dunn had uncovered additional copies of the Constitution, with the missing 13th Amendment printed in at least 18 separate publications by 10 different states and territories over 4 decades, from 1822 to 1860. In June of that year, 1991, Dodge uncovered the evidence that this missing 13th Amendment has indeed been lawfully ratified by the state of Virginia and was therefore an authentic amendment to the American Constitution. If the evidence is correct and no logical errors have been made, a 13th Amendment restricting lawyers from serving in the government was ratified in 1819 and removed from the U.S. Constitution during the war between the states. Since the amendment was never lawfully repealed, it is still law today. You heard that right. It's still law. It hasn't been repealed. It's just been covered up. They put another 13th Amendment on top of it, basically. You think about how crooked people are. And you, listen to me, people who steal a candy bar or a sandwich or whatever are put in prison. But these people aren't put in prison. You hear me? Lawyers are the lowest. Always have been. Even Jesus spoke out against them, as well as preachers who lie to you also about you going to heaven and that Jesus died on the cross for you. Folks, that is a lie. So, anyway, it was basically to deal with what I called the 13th Amendment. It was basically to these people, because they knew what these people were. Let me explain what lawyers do. They make law. They create law. And they make laws that are basically against natural law. You don't need all these books and all these huge books that have all these codes of law and this and that. All this baloney by what I call simply these lawyers create. No one they have to have books in order to go back and figure out what they passed and what was what they passed in the past. You see, they don't even know the information in the top of their heads because simply is just so much of it. There's so many laws that simply is, and yet they punish people who are simply just trying to feed themselves and trying to survive. Meanwhile, they, are patted on the back as though they're some kind of great heroes when they're not. They're nothing but shit. They destroy people's lives is all they do. And, but anyway, getting a little upset here. I need to calm down. But the point simply is that these people make laws to make you criminals. For example, let's see this. I had a friend talk to me last night. We talked for a couple of hours. And, I don't drink. I don't drink. If I get a beer, I get a beer when I go to a German restaurant, and that's it. And I don't go to a German restaurant maybe 4 or 5 times a year, if I even do that. So this guy was basically, he was drunk, and he was sitting on the side of the road, and um, apparently someone called, and the police came out, such and such. So they had to basically enter his car and his, check on him, whatever, and see who he was. They thought maybe something else was going on, which wasn't. And what I understand simply is that he wasn't driving his vehicle; he was sitting there parked. So I'm trying to figure out simply is if you're a drunk driver, you have to be driving a vehicle, and he wasn't driving a vehicle. And the evidence simply is they didn't see him in a moving vehicle, so they couldn't have did that. But yet they penalized him in many ways. That's how corrupt law is. I'm not saying what he did was right. I, being drinking and having a car is not the way to be. Okay, it's just not. But to understand simply is how they bend things to quote unquote to punish people. And this is the kind of system we have here in America. It's a joke. So let me go back to some things here from the Reformer. I'm not the Reformer, the Informer, as he talks about. So King John was this. Let's see, the king invoked the law of Mormon. Okay, so without Mormon, the king would lose the land he controlled. The Vatican didn't like that because the king owed a lot of pounds to the Vatican. So now you already owe money, and then you got to ask the question: why? Why did he owed a lot of pounds to the Vatican? In other words, he owns a lot of dollars, money-wise. King John refused to accept the Vatican's representative, Stephen Langton, whom Pope Innocent III installed to rule England religiously, or in fact, and in 1208, England was placed under papal interdict. Interdict means simply prohibition. So King John was excommunicated and is trying to regain his stature. He grovels before the Pope. So see, he kind of basically got himself in trouble here. He should have actually looked at how ways he could get out of this whole thing, and not make a statement and basically upset the Pope. So King John was excommunicated and is trying to regain his stature. He grovels before the Pope and returns the title to his kingdoms of England and Ireland to the Pope as vassal. So now here's the key: he's in a fix. He's in a fix based upon what he calls, and this is why you don't need to be a debtor. When you're a debtor, you are actually a slave to those, and those who are slaves have really no freedoms in a lot of ways. They're already pinned in a lot of ways. They don't have the opportunity to speak out and do things like they should, and are actually you're controlled as a slave. And so and then King John at this point, he's with the kings of England. So he was given back to Ireland to the Pope as vassals and swore submission and loyalty to him. King John accepted Langdon as Archbishop of Canterbury and offered the Pope a vassal bond of fidelity and homage. 2 months later, in July of 1213, King John was absolved, excommunicated at Winchester by the returned Archbishop of Canterbury, Langdon. On October the 3rd, 1213, by treaty, King John ratified his surrender of his kingdom to the Pope as Vicar of Christ, who claimed ownership of everything and everyone on earth as tradition. And you heard that again. I don't know why people go to a Catholic church. I've never understood that. I can understand people who would be going to a Protestant church, although I don't go to church anywhere. But to go to the Catholic church when somebody claims that he is the Pope and that now he claims himself, a Peter, as though he's some great person, when in reality most of these popes have destroyed most people's lives, all in the name of religion. But in reality, it's not religion. It's simply taking people's stuff, you see. So, And then is this, and this is something that Lysander Spooner talks about with the Constitution. And he talks about simply is that I didn't sign the Constitution. It's a contract. And if I didn't sign the contract, I'm not in agreement with it. Now you must understand some things here, folks. None of us signed the contract. Even Lysander Spooner in the 1850s, 60s, and eventually I think he passed away in the late 1870s or 80s, early 80s. He had a hatred towards government, and rightfully so. He wanted to have his own mail service, and he was in business to do that until the government came in and said, no, you can't do this. So if I understand this correctly, there was no one barring competition at that point. But they saw fit that basically they didn't want to have any competition. So we have the Postal Service today running mail. And it's critical to understand simply is that we never signed the agreement. I never signed it, you know, and yet it's considered the law of the land. We've been really fooled in a lot of areas, folks. We've been fooled not only in the politics, but also in religion. And these people are devils, is what they are. And the people who are in office and government positions and in religious positions pay homage to these people and think they're the greatest thing since sliced cake. So here's the contract based upon Treaty of 1213, which was between two parties. So now the barons of England would not put up with being slaves anymore. So they took the sword and made King John sign the Magna Carta. So doesn't this act of the barons violate the principle of natural law? When they created the Magna Carta as having no force and effect upon a contract between two parties. Well, Pope Innocent III, the other contracting party, thought so, for he declared the Magna Carta to be unlawful and unjust as it is base and shameful, whereby the apostolic seat is brought into contempt. The royal prerogative diminished, the English outraged, and the whole enterprise of crusade greatly imperiled. See, these are when the crusades are going on also. That's right. We're going to conquer Jerusalem. Okay, this is, I think there were 5 or 6 crusades that took place to conquer Jerusalem. And one was successful at first, but then it failed. That is, it conquered but couldn't hold it. And the Arabs took back over. And eventually it never was in the hands of the Crusaders. So it amazes me, and there's more here, but I'm not going to go into all that because it's a lot. I will say this much: at this time, we should have understood basically that the king couldn't give any freedoms to the United States neither. So. What I mean at that time in history, we now know who controlled the kings of England and the lands of the world. Now we have the Pope claiming the whole Western Hemisphere besides Europe. The Holy Seat of Antioch ruled all the eastern side, and the Holy Seat of Amazania ruled the western side, so there was conflict. So this is what people don't understand, or if they do understand, they don't talk about it. What bothers me the most is that what right do you have to own the property? You see, everybody could own 40 acres and there would still be plenty of land in the world. It is by far the worst thing in the world is that those who are rich rule over the poor and have done this for thousands of years. They have simply hurt their fellow man. Really, Really, their fellow man. What, why would you want to do that? But it's the insensitive attitude of greed, wanting to have this and that, having everything you could have, per se, for your benefit, and to rule over people, to be a dictator. And yet you want to own the land, but you didn't create it. How the hell do you think you should own it? You didn't create it, folks. These people didn't create it. So it's just imperative that people understand that. I mean, it's just like, who are you? Who are you? What are you? You want to own it all and have it all, but you don't want to pay any taxes on it, do you? You see, I live here in a house and have a little bit of property, but I know simply if I don't pay my property tax, I lose the house and the property. Now you just think about that, folks. Think about it. What kind of rulers do we have here? Not only here in America, but elsewhere. So I've got property on the other side of me here that someone owns, I think approximately 200 acres or such and such. Yet they claim it as farmland, and their property tax is less than mine. Now, they don't have a building on it, but they own 200 acres, and they claim they're growing crops as farmland. But since they've owned it, they have never grown any crops on it. See, it's a lie. It's a fucking lie. See, they make laws to benefit themselves, you see. It's not to deal with it. They make laws to punish you, and they make laws to benefit themselves. They're the hypocrites. They are enormous hypocrites. And people look up to these people and thinking they're great people, when in reality, they're the bottom of the pile. They're the bottom. They cause harm to all people. And I believe that simply Scripture says, Jesus speaks about, that those who used to be first will be the last. And I believe that's true. Eventually all this is going to be dealt with. And the last will become first, and the first will become last. In other words, you're going to deal with what I call karma and what you did to people. It ain't going to be a pretty picture, folks. So that's my thoughts today, and on the Allodial Title, and how we've been robbed as people. And we all could have been self-sustaining. Think about it, folks. Just think about it. If we had 40 acres and could run, and that's what people don't understand. They think they're better off now than they were in the past, and in many ways they're not, because they no longer you don't own the land, so you don't own the land, you don't have any freedom, you see, and everyone's dependent upon everyone. So we've given jobs and working positions, and yet we have far little property than what our great-great-grandparents had. So anyway, I appreciate you listening, and I wish you a good night, and take care.